This is Monday, February 14th, 2011. My name is Frieda Reitman, and it's my pleasure today to interview Rhea Davison at the archive of the Jewish Historical Society of Lower Fairfield County in Stamford as part of the Oral History Archive of the organization. I have been looking forward to this day. The video cameraman is Julian Reitman. I've really been looking forward to today to talk about you and Stamford and the community.
Me too.
I think we should start with your birth family background.
Okay.
I know you were born in Stamford, so where did your mother come from? Where did your father come from? And when did they get to Stamford and why?
Okay, well, I don't know if I have all those answers, but I'll do the best. Mother was born in New York City, Lower East Side. So she's American. And Dad came over from Russia when he was 6 with his parents.
And when did they come to Stamford? So that means
My father came to Stamford as a young man. I guess he entered through New York. You know, in those days they don't talk about it much, even though I asked. He said his Russian name was Nichnikov, not Epstein is my maiden name. But who knows? He always changed everything. He never was serious. And which now, you know, as a little girl it was fun, but now I wish I knew. All right, he came to Stamford to work at the railroad. I had an uncle, my mother's brother, Uncle Ruby Wool, and they were both young men in their 20s or whatever. Dad came over when he was 1906 from Russia. And he was just 6 years old, so we rounded off, he was born in 1900. So he was a young man, and Uncle Ruby said, Abe, come to work at the railroad yard in Stamford. And apparently that's what they did for a while.
And how did he meet your mother, and how did she get you?
My mother was sort of made a match. My mother's uncles in New York sort of put them together. And Dad used to drive in because he always had a car. As soon as cars came, he had an interest in cars. Drove in and picked up my mother and bring her, as she called Stamford, to paradise. She thought Stamford was paradise, especially the beaches, and it was so rural at the time.
So let's talk about some early childhood memories of you in Stamford. I know you and your siblings were all born here.
Yeah.
So do you have any particular
Yeah, I
memories
do.
you'd like to?
My oldest and firstborn was Marlene Epstein, born in 1931. My second sister, Doris Epstein, born in 1935. I was born in 1937. And my brother Robert Epstein was born in 1944. So I'm the third girl. And we were living at the time down on Woodland Place off Henry Street in a 2-family house. Or maybe more. It was just more than one family when I was born. And the big event there was the hurricane of 1938, because I was 1938. I was 1 year old when, of course, that whole part of town flooded out, and it became a big part of our family history. My mother took me, I was 1 year old, and the 2 girls, a little bit older, up to the roof, and she sat on the roof with the water lapping like a Katrina thing. Yeah, that's the way I found out. And where was my father? Well, by that time he owned Epstein Brothers Tire Shop, which was a little change your tire place on Brook Street and Pacific Street. He just had started his own business, and he was there also because it was flooded, so he sort of wasn't with us. And the story goes that he sent a boat, someone else, because he had to stay with the business, and they came and rescued us off the roof. I don't remember a thing, but that's the way the story goes. So that was Woodland Avenue, which still exists here in Stamford. In fact, the house does too, and I see it once in a while.
Is that the house your father built, or is that?
No, he didn't build that one.
He built a different one
Yeah.
that you wrote about.
Yeah, I can talk about that when you're ready.
Whenever, you know.
Okay. Well, after 1936, the big hurricane, they didn't want to go back living there, and he built a house in Glenbrook on Midland Avenue, and that's the house he built. At the time, there were no other houses on that street, and Glenbrook was pretty far away from the middle of town, and he built it out of brick, and he didn't build it with his own two hands, but he was in charge of everything.
And so let's talk after you were settled in a house. Do you have any memories that relate to Jewish events? Or?
No, that's interesting because living in Glenbrook, let's see, that had to be 1938, and I didn't leave that house, or none of us left that house till we went and grew up and became adults. You know, we went to college, or we got a career, or we got married. So, and my parents both died in that house, so that was where the Epstein family lived. But Glenbrook was not a particularly Jewish community at the time. And my sisters and I were the only Jewish children in Glenbrook School, which we walked to. We had a walk, and Glenbrook Schools, the building is still there, but the school was the elementary school. There was one kindergarten, one first grade, one second grade at the time. And so we were all in that one, whatever one room it was, that's where you went. And I'm talking during the war years, 1942. So we were the only Jewish children in the class, always.
So I've got to ask, did you find any anti-Semitism?
No, not at all. The only discomfort I had was as was done then, they celebrated Christmas, and there was a tree, and although they didn't teach Jesus, we sang Christmas carols, and I sang along, and when it was Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, we did not go to school, and everybody knew why we were absent. It was not a holiday, everybody else was there, and Pesach too was a holiday where we were absent if the school was in session. And they always did a Christmas pageant combined with Stark School, which was our sister school around the corner on Hope Street, I think, I forget. And we were always in it, and my sister Marlene was Mary, and that was the laugh of our family. My mother and father didn't object, they thought it was kind of cute. She had dark black hair, and she looked Jewish, I suppose, my older sister, and it's part of the family lore that Marlene played Mary in this thing, because they did really the creche scene back in the 40s.
Yes.
Then they went on to Santa Claus stories to make it a little less religious as the years went by, but they still always did a Christmas pageant.
And did you celebrate the Jewish holidays or other things in your home?
Yes, my dad wasn't too active, but my mother did. Her family in the Bronx, New York, were very traditional Jews, and we were with them through most of the holidays. Although my parents belonged to a Agudah Shalom, membership-wise, my father never went, but my mother went on holidays. I have to say, we had a Christmas tree for about 5 years. Dad used to bring it home, and I loved it, and it was fun. And I know this is what Jews did at the time, and he did that, I remember, for about 5 years. And we got the presents and all, but of course there was no teaching involved. It was just a party.
That's not uncommon at all, but
At
and
that
it's
time,
part
you're
of the
right.
whole picture
Right.
of what Jews did, you know, and all
Right.
varieties.
But I did feel lonely that I was the only Jew in Glenbrook. That was my impression, because there were no other Jews in in Glenbrook school, and
And you didn't go to Hebrew school?
No.
At a Gudas Shalom or someplace else?
well, we did. Being girls, you know, we didn't do bat mitzvah, though there
No,
wasn't,
no.
and it wasn't too important. And since my dad wasn't pushing, my mother finally got the three of us into Temple Bethel for Sunday school.
Okay.
But there was really no family participation, and it wasn't something we did. We did it willingly, and we did it, but it wasn't a good feeling. And so I did not have many friends, any Jewish friends in my public school, and I did not get along with or make any Jewish friends from Sunday school.
What about high school?
No, I never had Jewish friends.
Okay. What about college? Let's bring you to the next
No.
phase. You went to UConn at Stewart.
Yeah, I was always acting as a Jew. I went to Hillel, but unless there was a Jewish person in my dormitory or in my class, I did not hang out. Hillel was not that active in the 50s. I went to UConn in the 50s up at Storrs, graduated in 59, and I participated at Hillel, but it just didn't do. And I felt it. I wanted to have a Jewish social group, very, very much. And none of my sisters and I did, and we don't know why. It seemed, and this sounds very harsh, but, and I might mention a name, but Bobby Klein and Morty Klein were friends. Their parents were friends of my parents. But the children didn't play together, didn't get together much. And I always felt that Morty Klein, who married Bobby Klein, Barbara Klein, here, the native Stanford people, had this sort of Jewish clique, and we were not welcome.
So is that what sent you to the kibbutz in Israel? I
No.
found this out from reading.
That's a big jump. Okay. No, when my sister Marlene, 6 or 7 years older than I, was at college, she became an active Zionist. We're talking 1952. And Israel
It had
was
just been established.
Yeah, and it was very exciting. And she took off a year from college and went to an ulpan in Israel. She met her husband there. They're still married. They live in Washington, D.C. Jewish agency. First she went to a Zionist summer camp up in New York, Wappinger Falls, New York, and then off to Israel for a year, came back, got married, and I thought that was the great thing to do. And again, I told you earlier that I always felt I wanted Jewish friends. And I felt locked out of the Jewish community in Stanford. I know that wasn't true, but this is what I was feeling as a child. And I figured, oh, this is great. I'll go to Israel and meet Jewish people. And I did. I had it in my mind to finish college. My sister, she came home and finished. But I decided to get my degree and then go before I started my career as a teacher.
And did you enjoy Israel? Tell us a little about it at that time. And have you been back since?
Oh yeah. I've remained very connected to Israel. Before I go to Israel, may I talk a little bit about Stanford?
Yes.
In my desire to have Jewish friends, I did go to the B'nai B'rith BBG with
girls.
Mildred Schiller, who just died, and Arthur were friends of mine. And she was the BBG youth counselor there for the BBG girls. And I became president, and only because, like most reason people become president of an organization is because no one else wanted the job. So I became president, and I didn't particularly like being president. I'm not that type of thing. I'd rather be just a member, but I did it. I was all right. And it was a desire to think, well, this way I'll have a lot of Jewish friends. Well, that didn't happen either, because AZA was part of it, and yet I never made that breakthrough. Why? I don't know. But, and the tragic story, which I would like documented here, is every year in the spring, the AZA and the BBG had a spring dance at the Jewish Center. And lo and behold, nobody invited me. And I'm the president. So when Mildred Schiller found out, very late in the arrangement, everybody thought I was invited. They found out I didn't have a date, and the president is not going. That slipped through the crack. So I don't know where they did it. They hijacked some boy somewhere and told me he'll be coming to pick me up and all, and I got dressed and all. But he never came. And I stood and waited in my pretty dress, and nobody ever showed up. So it was a tragedy, and I'm sure by now it's more of a tragedy than it was then. But I never went to that dance. And
you weren't president again.
I think I was, yeah. I think until someone else wanted it, I was president. But one thing had nothing to do with the other. I just never went to the spring fling thing. Okay, so now we're in college, and by the way, my high school friends were not Jewish because they were from Glenbrook, and I just didn't have any Jewish friends because they weren't in my circle.
Are you friends with any of them now?
Oh,
Since you have lived here your whole life.
Well,
other than Israel, right?
Well, yeah, I became friends with Marilyn Bonoff. As an adult, life, it's a whole different story. I got involved in the Jewish Center and so on. But no, I'm really not in Ort. I am in Hadassah, but that's because I study Hebrew with the Hadassah group. I don't like joining things. I don't like, if I join, it's like the Jewish Historical Society. I will go and I love the library, and I go and volunteer my morning at the library. But I don't like meetings. I just don't like meetings. And I vote for the municipal elections, but I don't participate in politics or things like that. I just don't like to.
Can I bring you back to the kibbutz?
Yeah, all right, let me say what I did. I knew I was going to go. I didn't know how, so when I got to become a senior at University of Connecticut, the year was 1959, I went to Hillel, and I don't remember now, but I arranged to go to Israel for started for 1 year. The Jewish Agency, I interviewed with them in New York, and I went to a 1-year ulpan, which was 6 months on a kibbutz. I chose to be on a kibbutz in Jerusalem, and half the day to learn Hebrew and half the day to work on the kibbutz. Now that's very interesting because my 2 older sisters also went to Israel. My parents were not active Zionists, saying nothing against Israel, but they didn't do much with it. But the 3 girls were, and my brother is not. And we all went to Israel as young people, and I always called it the first, what did President Kennedy do? Peace Corps. I called it the original Jewish Peace Corps because it was just understood that the 3 of us would give a year to Israel when we could. But unlike my 2 sisters who went into the city, I wanted to work on a kibbutz. I wanted to work with my hands. I wanted to know what it was like to build the nation. And I had a choice to have an ulpan in the city and live sort of like a student life. But I said, no, I want to work. And that's what I did. I lived on Malech HaMisha in Jerusalem for, my original contract was 1 year. All I needed was 2 tickets, one to get there and one to come home. And after that, I had to give the Jewish agency these tickets. And after that, they took care of me for as long as I remained at the Ulpan and worked. I stayed there 2 years and married a kibbutznik.
So this is Herbert?
No, I married a man named Moshe Verbitsky. He is a Sabra, born in ancient Old Palestine. His parents were born in Old Palestine, except I think his father was born in Russia, but came a long, long history of living in, I'm going to say Palestine. He was alive in 1948 when it became a state. But we only stayed married 7 years, and I was divorced. I have 2 children with him, but he did not continue a relationship with us. And after 7 years, he disappeared. I don't know where he is.
Was he ever in the United States?
Yeah, he came to the United States. We were married on the kibbutz in 1960. We came to New York or Connecticut in 1961. Remember, I went there in 1959, so it's about 2 years I lived there on the kibbutz only, and we lived in Stamford. My parents helped us. He worked, and I was having babies in the early 60s, and I worked for the Jewish Center Nursery School with Sarah Walker, and I was pregnant with my boys, and it was what I wanted to do. I liked it. And but after 7 years, the marriage just didn't work.
Okay, so you stayed in Stamford.
Yeah.
And then you married
Herbert
in
Davison.
1970.
Yeah. I stayed in Stamford. I was a single parent for 3 years. I became a public school teacher, which was my plan. I always wanted to be a kindergarten teacher in the public school system, and I just proceeded to do that, to get my teaching certificate and do what had to be necessary. I worked out a way that my preschool children went with me to Sarah Walker Nursery School when they were preschoolers and I was the teacher. And then when they became public school age, we all moved over to the public school system, and I got a lot of help from the community. The community helped me because I had to go to college at night as a single parent, and the city of Stamford, I'm not sure which agency helped me. A woman came in and babysat when I went to the University of Bridgeport in the afternoon from 4 to like 9 at night to get my teaching certificate, which took 1 whole summer. And the community helped me a lot. They paid for it. They paid for her babysitting. And I got my teaching certificate. Also, now to get back to living in Stamford and being a Stamford native, my dad finally owned Epstein Brothers Tire Shop, a very important business in Stamford to the community. He used to do during all the recapping of all the police car tires, fire engine tires, ambulance tires, all municipal cars. He did the recapping. He had a federal license to import or to buy rubber, and he had a factory down on Pacific Street, and there were during the Second World War you couldn't get rubber, so he was allowed with a federal license to recap city tires, and he was very well known in the city of Stamford. So when in 1968, when I finally got my first job as a kindergarten teacher for the city of Stanford, I went down to get interviewed, and we just sat and talked about my father and what was her name? I'll think of it in a minute. The superintendent of schools was like my father's best friend, and I remember I didn't really have an interview. We just had a friendly visit, and they were so happy to have me.
Did you ever work in the business?
In my father's business?
Yes.
Oh yes, every Saturday morning I would.
A modern woman working in an auto shop.
Well, what did I do? I sat behind the desk. There was one little desk. I answered the phone, and if a customer came in, I rang a bell, and Dad or somebody, my uncle Morris Epstein, would come in from the back where the factory was and sell new tires. I did pump gas for a while. I remember it was 15 cents a gallon. I had to make out a ticket because most of his customers were on credit. They were companies in town. And I kept the files when they would come buy the gas, and I'd have to file the receipt and mail out the bills at the end of the month. But there was a full-time secretary, and I was her assistant. And I worked Saturdays mornings and got paid what we arranged 75 cents an hour or something, and that was my allowance. Yeah, I was the only one of the girls who did that. The other girls didn't want to have anything much to do with it.
Did your brother?
No.
Okay.
No. But I did.
I think that's wonderful. And I'm glad to find this out, because you didn't write about this.
I didn't.
But it's an important part of who you are, actually, to have had that experience.
Yeah, I remember Redmond Chevrolet and Mohawk. They sold tires, but then they sold kitchen stuff. Mohawk on Elm Street or Myrtle Avenue. I remember all the businesses in Stanford had an account with my father's factory, because he was the only one who recapped. If you had a truck or a van or any kind of thing with wheels, you had to go to my father during the war to get your tires taken care of. He was, besides Sears and Mohawk, he was the only one who sold new tires, and he was the only one who recapped them.
Did your mother work in it? In the
At my
store?
father's? She told me she did before the children were born. But since I was the third girl, I never saw that. No, she was a stay-home mother, worked at home.
All right, let's get to your next marriage. And
Yeah, I was single for 3 years and having a ball. I loved it. It was one of the best times of my life. I didn't really want to get married again, but I didn't care. I was teaching in the public schools. I had 2 babies, 2 and 5 at the time. But I had the world on a string, and I was 32. And I mean, everything was coming up roses. My parents helped me a lot. I lived in a house on Hope Street owned by my father, 361 Hope Street. The house is still there, and I paid the utilities. It's a 2-family house. I lived upstairs in the apartment with my children. And Dad said I didn't have to pay rent, but I'd have to pay the utilities. And I guess he paid the taxes, and that's it. And I paid the utilities for what I used. And I dated, and I went to the single club at the Jewish Center. When I went there was no single club at the Jewish Center, but I went in. I was working with Sarah Walker, and I knew the people there, and I said, why isn't there a Jewish singles group here? And they said, well, you want one? Go ahead. I said, well, it'll cost something. He said, all right, we'll fund it. Bring us what you need, and we'll fund it for you. So I ran it for 1 year, and there was usually just a group of women. And then I said, we need some men in this thing. So we somehow got a few men, and they didn't have to be Jewish, just men. And then I also joined Parents Without Partners. at the time, and I was having such a wonderful time. I became a member of, remember I said I don't like committee meetings and politics of organizations. I like the fun part, but not the work part. I became a member of the membership committee of the Parents Without Partners here at Stanford. It was very active in the 1965, 66, 67 when I was single. And I would take the membership list of people who called the 800 number, pick out all the Jewish names, and call them, because we had a deal where to welcome newly divorced or widowed people, you know, they needed some kind of hand, friendship hand, to get them comfortable to come to the Parents Without Partners. And I said, I'll do it, but I only picked out the Jewish men. I said, that's it. That's what I'll do. And I did. And I found one guy, the name was Rhea Davison. He worked at Barnes Engineering. Sounded good to me. And the story goes that I got the number, and my job as membership member was to call him. I called him, and I said, I'd like to escort you to next Saturday night. We're having a welcome party, and I'll come and get you. And he said, who are you? And I told him. He said, do you know where I am? I said, well, it says here Barnes Engineering. I don't know where that is even. He says, I am in a secret meeting in a vault in Barnes Engineering, which is a building in Stanford. And this, because I work on government secret missile things, I have code red, and I have no idea how you got into this vault on this telephone. I said, I don't know either, but I'm happy I did. Are you coming to the party? And we always, again, a family myth, you know, to go along with Nitschnikov and the flood of 1938. This became a family story that I somehow got in on that red telephone that only the president comes to. I said, I dialed the number you had on the card. I don't know. And that started it, and it took us about a year of meeting, but I had a diabolic plan. I said, Parents Without Partners is very nice, but I want a Jewish relationship. Being Jewish was always important to me, and if I was going to date or be serious, not necessarily marry any man, I wanted him to be Jewish. It meant a lot to me. And so I said to Rhea Davison at Parents Without Partners, I said, I'd like you to come to the Jewish Center singles party meeting. And he did, and he came to the meeting, and I got the 3 other women to vote him president. When you said, you know, I was president of the Neighborhood Girls, I didn't like to be that, but with this, I quickly arranged it, and he became president of the Jewish Center Jewish Singles Club. And so he said, but I have a rule. I never want to have meetings, I just want to have fun. And that sounded like my style. And he went down to the manager or the director of the Jewish Center, and I went with him, and we introduced him. He's the new president, and he said, I want to have a monthly meeting, and I want you to pay for the entertainment and the food. We will charge $1 or $2 at the door to cover expenses, but we're not going to have meetings, we're just going to have fun. And they said, okay, you know, we'll see how it goes, and so on. And what he did was hire belly dancers. And it was the funniest thing. He literally said, because it's a Jewish thing, and, you know, Israel existed and all, belly dancing is an ethnic dance, and we're going to have entertainment at every party. It'll be dancing, food, and entertainment. And he did. He hired, I don't know how he did it, but he hired belly dancers. And we used to go to the Jewish Center and interview them. We never did it like off the street. They had to come for an audition. And that year we had so much fun. So much fun. And And after knowing him a year, we got married. And that was interesting too.
Okay, so far everything's interesting.
Yeah, that was quite interesting. You want to hear it? Yeah.
Sure.
Okay. He was separated from his wife and his 3 children who lived in Ardsley, New York. But he lived in Stamford, worked in Stamford, and had been separated for 2 or 3 years. But because there was a question about a get, his wife wanted a get, he never went through officially paperwork divorce. And after I got interested in him, I said, I can't continue this relationship if you're still married. You're not living with her and you're not seeing her, but we can't go any further. And he ended up, I said, if you want me, you got to get paperwork done. And it happened. They did it. I don't know how they did it. He did it. They did it. But I don't think there was a get. There was just a
But there was a civil divorce.
Civil divorce. It didn't. My divorce was here in Stamford back in my day before I met her. But his divorce was when we started to get serious. My boys were 5 and 7, and he became very much a part of my life. And we planned a wedding for a school vacation, 1970, December 26th. And a week before that, he was at my house. It was a Saturday night. When I went into shock, I had an ovarian cyst that burst. Saturday night, and Rabbi Paul Silbersher was going to marry us the following Saturday. Paul Silbersher was the rabbi at Temple Sinai at the time, 1970. And I called the doctor because I had very bad pains, and it was a Saturday night, week before the Christmas holiday, and the doctor, my regular gynecologist, was out somewhere. And the answer was, take a hot bath and call me back in the morning. Well, while I was in the bathtub, I went into shock, and the cyst burst, and I was bleeding internally. And if Herb wasn't, and I just passed out in the water, and if Herb wasn't with me at the time, I would have died right there. And he rushed me and the boys to Stamford Hospital, and I was told I might not live. And I said, I've got to live because I want to marry this guy. I remember saying that. And I lived.
Okay.
And I had an operation. Herb took care of my boys while I was in the hospital. Although I had a mother in town, my relationship with her was not good. We didn't see each other very much. She still lived in that Glenbrook home. And we had already paid for our honeymoon in the Bahamas, and I had arranged with, at the time, Piper's Hill to take my children. I had paid for everything. I was working as a teacher in the Stamford Public School System, so our wedding was the 26th of December that year, 1970, and we were going to go off to the Bahamas and come back on New Year's 71, and but here I am in the hospital with stitches, and people said, you can't go anywhere, and the wedding is off and all, and I said, no way am I giving him up. There's no way that I'm not having this wedding. So I'll never forget it. I called Paul Silbersher, and he said, look, I'll marry you in the hospital. What can I say? I'll come to the hospital. I said, you got it. We had planned to have a wedding at my girlfriend's house in New Canaan. We had a license for New Canaan. And I went to the head of the nursing there. I was on the maternity ward because that's where they do ovarian cysts. And I said, I'd like to get married in this hospital next Saturday night. And she said, I don't understand what you're talking about. You know, no one ever got married in the maternity ward in Stamford Hospital. I said, well, here I am. And she said, well, you're going to have to call the director of the hospital. We don't have a procedure for this. So they wheeled me to the public payphone, and I called up and I said, I got his number. I am Rhea Epstein. I want to get married. I'm at the hospital. I need your permission to go to use the chapel. He said, who are you and where are you? And I said, I'm on the maternity ward at Stanford Hospital and I have to get married next Saturday and I need your permission. And there was this long silence. And he says, lady, you got it. He didn't ask too many questions.
Okay.
And
So that was the beginning of that marriage.
But I have to tell you, the nurses were so thrilled because it was December 26th, New Year's Day. I had my hair done at the hospital. Rabbi Silbersher came, and it was the chapel was all decorated for Christmas. And we moved the poinsettias away, and my brother came, and my children, and Herb and I were married. And the next morning, with my stitches, in a wheelchair, we left the hospital for the Bahamas.
Okay. That's really a very fascinating story.
Yeah,
Right, so you married him. Did you join a temple after that?
No. We both wanted to be Jewish, but we didn't want to affiliate. And at the time, we found a group called the Makom with Rabbi, I forget his name now. In fact, Stone, I still know the family. They moved to St. Louis, Missouri. I know the children. It was a Havurah based in New Canaan. I'll think of the name in a minute.
Yeah, okay.
And a group of us, it was one of the original Havurahs. The year was 1972. And we just hired a rabbi, a group of people, and that was our thing.
That's certainly a commitment to Jewish.
Yeah, we didn't join a building, we joined a group, a Havurah, and we loved it. It was very much what we wanted, and we were very committed, we always, worked on every committee and made it happen. Had our children bar mitzvahed, and, but we never owned a building, and so it was called the Makom. In Hebrew, Makom means the place. Mm-hmm. And I'll think of the name. It starts with an S. And the rabbi had two sons, and the two sons are now friends of my two sons. They were all the same age. And the rabbi retired and moved to Florida, but the two sons moved to St. Louis, Missouri, and now they are still friendly with my sons in St. Louis, Missouri. So we still know the family.
I don't know whether you want to talk at all about Herb and his poetry. Or...
Yeah, I just want to say that Macomb lasted about 7-8 years, and it's when the rabbi retired, it sort of disintegrated. But we ended up then joining the Fellowship of Jewish Learning with Rabbi Emily Korzenek, and we stayed members of that group and became active, very active in that group until today. I mean, I still am a member of that group and love it. And it's a big family. It's my Jewish family. Herbert is gone now. He was murdered in 2009. And today's the 14th of February. He was murdered. He was assaulted on January 27th, 2009, and he died February 22nd, 2009. He never regained consciousness. He lingered in a coma in Stanford Hospital from the January 27th to the February 22nd, like 3 weeks. And but he was an artist, a poet, a wonderful father. He adopted my children legally, my two children, after their biological father left the scene. We were one big family. He had 3 children, and we were all, although his children lived with his first wife in Westchester, even till today, we are still one family. I was on the phone with his children just yesterday discussing the grandchildren. So now there's grandchildren. And they all know each other, and they're all very friendly with each other, and everything is, thank God, doing well. But Herbert died. His murder trial will be this March 2011. We're involved in that. Herbert was assaulted in the parking lot behind Curly's Diner on a Tuesday night on January 27th.
No, there's no
We don't know why.
answer of something like that.
The criminal is a 45-year-old man who was a chiropractor, owned property in Stamford and Greenwich and Florida, and he was caught, and we have finished the civil trial, and now the state of Connecticut is pursuing the criminal trial, which I have nothing to do with, except if I'm called as a witness.
Wow. Do any of your children or grandchildren live in Stamford?
No, I'm the only one now. By the way, Herbert built and designed the house I live in downtown Stamford. Artist Renee Kahn considers it a seventh wonder of the world. She loves it. It was his design. It took him and me 25 years to build it. We bought property in downtown Stamford off Grove Street. We did not want to live up in the ridges. We wanted to maintain Stamford, the old Stamford. And at the time in 1970-71, downtown Stamford was becoming gentrified. The old houses where all my aunts and uncles lived when my dad was here had houses there and lived there. And Atlantic Street, and we knew all the owners of all the shops, the Bloomfield's Delicatessen and all the furniture stores and hardware stores and everything. And downtown Stamford was becoming condos, and he and I said, let's build a house there and try to keep downtown Stamford with a tree or two, you know. And we did that. It's very unusual, and Renee Kahn and the Stamford Art Association considers Herb's house a piece of art, and I live in it now myself, and it's just beautiful.
That's really wonderful. And did you go back to Israel again?
Yeah.
And did you do any other travel? you wanna
Quite a bit.
mention?
My 2 years of living in Israel, I learned to speak fluently. I can't read or write that well or spell, but I can understand street Hebrew very well, and I can communicate. Finally, in 2006, I went back to Israel. Herb was still alive. We went back for a week. I was in the Melton Adult Education Group, and as a graduation trip, we went to Jerusalem to Hebrew University to graduate from the Melton 2-year program. And Herb came with me, and we spent a week there on a tour with the Melton group. So I went back then. Actually, we spent 10 days. And then in 2009, after Herb died, my friend Marilyn Bonoff and Bob Bonoff, members of the Jewish Historical Society, very important members, both gone now. After Bob Bonoff died, Marilyn said to me, Rhea, will you take me to Israel? I've never gone, and I'm getting older, and Bob's gone, and Herb's gone, and you know Hebrew, let's go. And I said yes right away, and we went with the Federation, Jewish Federation here from the Jewish Center. We went on their 10-day tour, and then Marilyn and I stayed on another week and continued our trip, and she died. We were back in November. She died that following January. But I know it was a dream of hers all her life, because she had tried to go to Israel with Bob, but he was very sick, and she had to put off many trips, and she always said, I will go someday, and God bless. I swear, I mean, it was one of the most wonderful things I did to take her to Israel, and we were wonderful friends there. I spoke the language, and we were just two women having a wonderful time, widows, but it was great. And to do this, her family told me that I gave Marilyn a gift by going with her and so on, and it was wonderful. Today I study Hebrew. I'm in the advanced class with Hadassah women. We meet an hour and a half a week at the Jewish Center, and I've been going for 4 years now, and I'm in the advanced class. And I speak Hebrew, I read Hebrew now. I don't know how to spell or write, but I'm trying, I'm learning.
It sounds like quite a life you've had. Very many things, and it's very interesting.
Thank you.
Any final reflections as we say?
Yeah, when you asked me about growing up in Stanford, as I said, the Jewish community for young people was not too comfortable in Stanford. I knew Rabbi Aaron Krantz from Agudah Shalom, but I did not have a group of friends. There was no, but today, you know, there's Kulanu. The Jewish Center is active with many, many social groups, and that's good. That's really, really good. I wish I had had it, but I grew up okay.
Right. I think